victories. They were not in hardships. But now that their king is gone, there's civil war, there's strife, there's a lot of discontentment going on. And it's all a result of David leaving. But David left because their hearts went away from David and went towards Absalom. And that's kind of the way it is sometimes in our life. When God is not the king of our life, we allow strife, discontentment. The reason that is God's never left us, but we've left God. And that's what Israel did. David had to leave because they left him. And so they were not accepting David in his rightful place. And there was just all this discontentment and strife going on. And then, but the king couldn't come back, we talked about last week, because of the sinfulness of his people. The people were still sinning and not allowing David to come back. And in our lives, the reason God can have full rule and reign over us is because of the sin that we continue to allow in our lives. If God's going to rule in our life, we have to get rid of those things. And the last thing was the coming of David was dependent upon the people's submission to his vision. And if God's going to rule and reign in our life, we have to be submitted to his will and his vision. It's not our vision all the time, it's his vision. And if we ever lose sight of that, then he will not be able to rule and reign in his rightful place. When we've given Christ our hearts, then it's his place and it's his rule, his place to rule in. But in chapter number 23, this is kind of a chapter, kind of honestly, kind of a hall of fame a little bit in a way. It's cataloging David's mighty men. And so these are valiant men of war, valiant men of faith. And now that David's back, he's kind of, this part of the Bible is just talking about his mighty men. So we're going to kind of go through that a little bit this morning. So now these be the last words, in chapter 23, verse 1. Now these be the last words of David. David, the son of Jesse, said, and the man who was raised up on high, the anointed of the God of Jacob, and the sweet psalmist of Israel. The Spirit of the Lord spake by me, and his word was in my tongue. The God of Israel said, the rock of Israel spake to me. He that ruleth over men must be just, ruling in the fear of God. So the first three verses here is David. He's talking, these be the last words of David. And it kind of goes with who he was, right? He goes back in remembrance of where he came from. He was the son of Jesse. And he remembered who he was raised up by. He didn't raise himself up to be the king. God raised him to be the king. And David's kind of in remembrance of that. He was anointed of the God of Jacob, and the sweet psalmist of Israel said. So he remembered who his king was. David was the king of Israel, but David himself had a king, and that's what gave him the ability to rule and reign over Israel. And then the Spirit of the Lord spake by him, and now he's going to kind of remember some of his mighty men. But in that last part of verse 3, he says, he that ruleth over men must be just, ruling in the fear of God. So if we're gonna rule, if we're gonna be leaders in churches, leaders at our job sites, leaders over anything, we have to be just and we have to be ruling in the fear of God. If we fear man, well, that's not right, because we'll be hindered. The fear of man bringeth a snare. It ensnares us, it traps us. But when we rule with the fear of God, then the fear of man doesn't bother us in reality. Now, so I know sometimes men can be scary, but if we're ruling fearing God, it'll allow us to overcome that fear. Because we're not fearing God because he's going to beat us up or because he is, but because of how holy and how just and how righteous he is. And when we're living in that fear of God, it's going to allow us to rule over men better. That doesn't mean have them under our hand and just beat them into submission, but that means we're going to lead them along. And that's what David's saying here. If you're going to rule the nation, as David was, he was a leader. He wasn't a driver like Saul was. People followed him. People wanted to follow him. But he did that. He was able to do that because he feared God. And he feared what God, he wanted the will of God for his life. And so in verse 4, we'll pick back up. And he shall be as the light of the morning when the sun riseth, even a morning without clouds, as the tender grass springeth out of the earth by clear shining after rain. Although my house be not so with God, yet he hath made with me an everlasting covenant, ordered in all things, and sure. For this is all my salvation, all my desire, although he make it not to grow. But the sons of Belial shall be all of them as thorns thrust away, because they cannot be taken with hands. But the man shall touch them, but the man that shall touch them must be fenced with iron, and the staff of a spear, and they shall be utterly burned with fire in the same place. These be the names of the mighty men whom David had the Tachmonite that sat in the seat, chief among the captains. The same was Adonai, the Ezite. He lifted up his spear against 800 whom he slew at one time. So before we get into this whole list here, he's pretty much going to name off all of his mighty men. And some of them are going to stand out a little bit more than others because of the mighty acts that they did. But here's David saying, he's reminded, as he shall be as the light of the morning, when the sun rises, even a morning without clouds, a tender grass spring out of the earth by clear shining. And he's talking about who God is. He's talking about how God is. But in verse 5, although my house be not so with God, yet he hath made with me an everlasting covenant, ordered in all things, and sure, for this is all my salvation. All of his salvation wasn't in whether his house is following God, because we know that a lot of his house didn't follow God. But his salvation was sure because God had made a promise. And even though those people were not going with him, the covenant was an everlasting covenant of who David would be. You remember going all the way back when David wanted to build the temple and Nathan came to him and said, you can't build the temple because of all the blood that you've shed. God made a covenant with him right then that his name was going to be with the great kings of the earth and that his covenant would be an everlasting one. David's seed was going to go all the way. And we know that Jesus came from the line of David. So even though at this moment in time his house was pretty much exceeding sinful, I mean, he lost pretty much his whole family. Amnon died, Absalom died, Tamar was taken advantage of. He had a wife that didn't want to be with him. Micah didn't want anything to do with him, didn't want to honor and glorify God. Although my house be not so with God, yet he hath made with me an everlasting covenant. He was still comforted. Even because he had come back, he had gotten right with the Lord. He was trying to do right and to be right. And he remembered that God made that covenant with him. And so even though people around you might not be doing right, even though people around you might not want you to do right, you can rest on that covenant that when we get saved, we've been saved from the wrath of God, from the eternal wrath of God. And so we will be in heaven. So even although my house be not so with God, but he has made an everlasting covenant, ordering all things, and sure. It's not shaken. It's a sure thing that it's going to take place. For this is all my salvation, all my desire, although he make it not to grow. And so that's just word of encouragement there, that even though these things might be going on, even though your house may be in turmoil, you can go all the way. You're going all the way. The covenant has been made. And David was resting on that. And now he's going to talk about some of his mighty men. Now David had 600 men that came with him, that followed after him. You can go all the way back to 1 Samuel. And these men, they were debtors. They were people who owed Saul things. Some of them were even some of Saul's own family members. Because Saul, again, was that driver. He wasn't a leader. People didn't want to follow him. He didn't lead by example. We found that out in chapter 17 real quick. I mean, the first person that really should have been fighting Goliath was Saul, because Saul came from that lineage of warriors. But he wasn't leading by example. He was waiting for somebody else to take the sword and go fight Goliath. And that's why nobody wanted to follow. But people wanted to follow David. People loved David. That's why Saul got so envious of him, right? Because when David comes back to Israel, goes back to the place to where the kingdom was, all those women were singing his praises. You know, David's killed his 10,000, Saul his thousands. So he was somebody that people looked up to. People wanted to follow him. And he was not that driver. Saul drove people away from him. And so all these men that went to David were people that either owed Saul something, and Saul held it over their heads, and they wanted a savior in reality. That's what they wanted, and David offered them that. But he had 37 men who we're going to mention here, 37 men who were the greatest of those 600 men. They were the mighty men of David. And, you know, there's a lot of stories. You probably already heard stories about these men and the mighty feats they accomplished. But they didn't accomplish these feats because of who they were. They accomplished these feats because they stood on the business of God. They were doing God's business, and God gave them great strength in their time of struggle. So in verse number 8, these be the names of the mighty men whom David the Tachmonite that sat in the seat, chief among the captains. The same was Adonai the Ezite. He lifted up his spear against 800 whom he slew at one time. Now, you might think about this too, that a lot of these numbers, they seem unrealistic. but they're not. I mean, we trust the Bible. We trust the Bible was written and it was inspired by the Lord, by God. And so these numbers are real. And you might think, well, how is it even possible that one man stood and slew 800 men at one time? Because he stood with God. He was doing the will of God. The reason he was able to do that, if we go out and we just say, I'm going to go fight a battle that doesn't need to be fought, we cannot guarantee that God will be with us. The Israelites found that out real quick when they went to Jericho and the walls came down, and the very next battle, they go to Ai. I mean, it was just a little bitty town, not a whole lot of people in it, and they got all high-minded because they figured, we just took out this fortified city of Jericho. Well, they forgot. They didn't do that. They didn't even raise up a spear. They just marched around the city, blew some trumpets. The walls came tumbling down, and it was given to them. They didn't do anything, but they're just like us. We get a victory, and all of a sudden we think that we are something, and they say, we're going to go right over here to Ai, and we're going to destroy them. And what happened is Ai just basically kicked them out. They killed some of them, and then they come back with their heads down, all because they did not seek the counsel of God. Now, there was other reasons. We know that there was I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but there was a man who was living in sin, who was one of their leaders. And that's one of the reasons God could not bless them, because they had not gotten the sin out of the camp. You can't stand with God if you have people around you, people in your leadership group, or people that are fighting with you that are in sin. I thought about this, Brother Jason Dover. He told me a story one time. They went to you might have seen the video a while back. I think it might have been here. I know it was at camp, so y'all might not have seen this video. But he went to the Amazon. They got stuck out there for 40 days. And I asked him, I said, when you're asking people to come on this trip with you, how do you vet them? Because you can't just let anybody go with you. And he said, more important than physical qualities, it's spiritual qualities that he's looking for. He's like, because we're not special. We weren't survivalists, right? Necessarily. I mean, they knew what they were doing. But if you got sin in your heart, then God cannot be with you in the same. I mean, obviously, he's never left us nor forsaken us, but there's that gap between you and the Lord. And he said it's more spiritual than it is even physical when you're out there and you need God. You need people to get a hold of God. So when we're going to go fight those battles for the Lord, when we're going to stand against the wiles of the devil, we have to be in tune with him. And if you've got sin in your heart, you're not going to be in tune with God. Until you get those things right, you're not going to be in tune with God. And so these men, that slew 800 whom he slew at one time, they weren't doing it because they were somebody. And they never even thought of themselves as somebody. They thought of themselves as doing the will of David, but doing the will of God. And that's why it's important to who is your leader. If I think about Paul when he wrote those letters to the First Thessalonians, he all the time talked about how they followed after Paul. They followed after Paul. And Paul could write that because if they followed Paul, then they were following God. That's how closely Paul followed God. So obviously we don't want people to follow us, but we want our leaders to be in tune with God so that when we follow them, we can trust that we are following God. Now obviously we need to find the will of God out for our life, but David was their commander. So when they were fighting these battles, they were fighting for David, but they were fighting for the Lord. And that's who gave them their strength. That's who gave them the ability to do all these things. You think about Samson and all the mighty things that he did. He wasn't doing that in his own strength either. And we would consider him a mighty man. All the stories about how mighty he was. But when he thought of himself as somebody and thought of himself as strong, that's when he fell. But when he relied on the Lord for his strength, that's what gave him the ability to have these great victories. And that's what these men were doing. These mighty men of David, mighty men of Israel, they were trusting the Lord for their strength. They weren't doing it on their own. And I think so many times the reason that we fall is not because we don't have the strength to do it, but it's relying on our own strength and not the strength of the Lord. And sometimes that's why God chooses the foolish things of the world to confound the wise, and the weak things of the world to confound the strong. Because if the world can look at you and say, well, you're a strong person, so no wonder you could do that, well, God's not going to get the glory from that. But when God takes somebody weak and he gives them the strength to do it, that's why Brother Chris talks about how he wants what's happening around here to be something that the world can look at and just know that it is God. Not they can look at us and say, oh, they did something, but so miraculous that it's God. And when these people were fighting these battles, it wasn't, people couldn't, I guarantee you, when they go out here and there's a bunch of Philistines coming down off the hill and there's one man standing in the field, when that man got done defeating them, I guarantee you they didn't look at him and say, wow, that's a great warrior. I'm sure they did in a way, but they could know that the God of Israel was on their side. And when the world looks at us, they can know that our God is on our side. And that's why he taught, I think, I like the disciples. I know I'm kind of all over the place right now. But the disciples, when they went to the Lord and the Lord told them, you're going to go before the kings of this world. Now, if you remember who the disciples were, they were fishermen, tax collectors, people that most of the world wouldn't really think of as cool people. You wouldn't think that you're going to send the fisherman that's off the pier to the White House. But God said, you're not going to be talking when you get there. I'm going to give you the words in season for them that are weary, then you're going to confound them. And that's what happened when the disciples would talk to a lot of people. They're like, aren't these the guys that, didn't they think about that about Jesus? They thought, isn't this the carpenter's son? How is he so wise? It confounded them. And that's what God will do for us. He will confound the wise people of the world if we rely on him. But in my own life, sometimes when you're witnessing to somebody, you think, well, I'm not smart enough to witness to this person. Probably not. But God can give you the words to say and to confound them. God promised that would take place. The weak and the unlearned things to confound the strong and the wise things. And I'm going to try. I don't know the references to those verses, though. I know those are, that's the word of God, that the weak things of the world would confound the strong, and that the foolish things to confound the weak, or the wise. That's why he chose the foolishness of preaching, right? It don't make any sense to the world to preach the gospel, but that is the good news, the gospel of Lord Jesus Christ through this world. And so these mighty men, they weren't standing on their own. They were standing for the God of Israel, and that's who gave them the ability. So we'll just continue reading in verse 9. After him was Eleazar, the son of Dodo, the Ahohite, one of the three mighty men with David when they defied the Philistines that were there gathered together to battle, and the men of Israel were gone away. He arose and smote the Philistines until his hand was weary, and his hand clave to the sword, and the Lord wrought a great victory that day, and the people returned after him to spoil. And after him was Shammah, the son of Agi, the Harite, and the Philistines were gathered together in a troop where there was a piece of ground full of lentils, and the people fled from the Philistines. But he stood in the midst of the ground and defended it and slew the Philistines, and the Lord wrought a great victory. Now, I don't remember, Brother Simpson preached out of these portions of scriptures at the Young Adult Conference. I don't know if y'all remember that. And, you think about this story here, these are just lentils, right? These are just, I think lentils are like a bean. They're food, though. It's food for people. And, this man is standing in the field. You got Shammah, the son of Agi, the Harite. The Philistines were gathered together into a troop where there was a piece of ground full of lentils. And you might just think and say, well, that's just a piece of ground. Well, what happens when you give up one piece of ground? The next thing's going to happen is you're going to give up another piece of ground. And then you say, well, this piece of ground isn't that important. Well, this man thought it was, because once you give up one area, it gives the Philistines a little bit more space. When you give up one area in your life, it gives the devil just a little bit more ground in your life. And then you back up a little bit and you say, well, I'm going to stand my ground here. Well, then the going gets tough, and you back away from that. And then the next thing you know, you have no ground left. I think about, I'm not going to get into that. That's politics. I'm not going to do that. But you can't give up ground, because next thing you know, if you just keep giving up a little bit and a little bit and a little bit, and you don't keep inventory of it, the next thing you know, you have nothing left. And that's why it was important to Shammah to stand this ground, to keep this little piece of ground. To the rest of the world, it might not have made any sense. The Philistines, when they were looking at them, they're like, it's just lentils. It's not even a big deal. It's not even like the cattle, with the meat. It's not like it was corn. It was just beans. Just a little thing. Esau gave up his birthright for some lentils, for some beans, right? But it's not a lot. But it was important enough for this man, even when the rest of the warriors, I mean, it talks about we're gathered together in a troop, and the people fled from the Philistines. So there were people that were with him when the battle started. And he turns around, Brother Simpson was talking about how, he probably turned around, and then he's like, guys, they're coming. He turns around, there's nobody there. Well, my first instinct would probably be like, well, they left, I guess I should leave. But that wasn't Shammah's first instinct. Shammah's first instinct, if none go with me, still I will follow. If there's nobody here, then I'm gonna have to make the stand. Because the thing is, I like it in David's existence in Israel. He was the only one that took a stand against Goliath. But all it took was one man taking a stand against Goliath, and the rest of the nation had a revival because of one man. All it takes is one person. I believe it's Isaiah, it might be Ezekiel, talking about how he was looking for a man to make up the hedge, but the Bible talks about how he found no man. There was nobody. But my dad, he kind of, our theme for the year last year at the church in Indiana was, can you just find one person? All you need is one person to take a stand. And I mean, it might not be easy, but it says, and the ground, he defended and slew it, and wrought a great victory. He wrought a great victory for the nation of Israel. If you can get a victory in your life, then God might use that testimony to give somebody else a victory in their life. But if you don't take, I think the problem is we're all I know for me too. I'm not talking to y'all, just y'all. I'm talking to me too. But we're waiting for everybody else to do something. We say when they do something, then I'll do something. Well, what about if you do something, they'll do something? Why don't you change it around? We're always looking for somebody else. I was reading the book today, and I was wondering where I was going to be able to use this quote, but the church's victory is dependent upon the members' individual victories. Individual victories. We're waiting for everybody. We're waiting for Judah to have a victory in his life, for me to have a victory in my life. Well, no, you need to have a victory in your life and quit worrying about everybody else. I mean, now I'm not saying just quit worrying about them and never talk to them, but we focus so much on what everybody else is doing instead of just focusing on, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? And I liken this. I always love being able to use baseball illustrations because I play baseball. But baseball is what we call an individual team sport, okay? There were 9 people on the field, but if I was catching, I couldn't play shortstop. I couldn't play second base. I couldn't pitch. I couldn't play the outfield. We were all dependent upon each other, but it was up to the individual to make the play. Once the shortstop threw the ball, unless he made a bad throw, it was no longer his job for the first baseman to catch the ball. But he had to do his part so the first baseman could make his part. And so in the Christian life, we have to make our part, and then the rest then we depend on everybody else to do their part. That's why the church is the body. Not everybody's a head, not everybody's an eye, not everybody's an ear, not everybody's a mouth. But if we're missing one out of the other, I'm sure we can ask Brother Ron, if you're missing a toe, it's not going to be easy necessarily. You know what I'm saying? It's not gonna be the same. It's not gonna be the same. It's not gonna be the same. That's just what I'm saying. It's just not gonna be the same. Yeah, I'm just saying. It's not though. It's okay. But it's just not gonna be the same. You just ask. You ask somebody if they're missing an arm, if their life is the same. He's missing one. So you're right. We're hitting everybody today. If somebody's missing an eye, their depth perception is off, you're just not going to be right. So the victory of the church is dependent upon everybody having their victory in their life. I didn't mean to be funny, but I guess I did actually. But in verse 13 now. So basically, Shammah just held his ground. We need to hold some ground. That's the lesson out of that one. You need to hold some ground. Don't give up a little bit, because you give up a little bit, if you just I forget the word I want to use, but if you give up a little bit, you lose your stand in one area and you quit standing, you'll fall for everything, because you make your stand in the next one and you just keep backing down. That's the enemy's goal. The enemy's goal is to convince you that what you're standing on isn't that important. I mean, maybe the Philistines were saying, you do realize you're the only one standing here right now. Everybody else left. Why are you still standing? And that can play tricks in your mind, but you just gotta take your stand and hold your ground. And it says, and the Lord, again, and the Lord wrought a great victory. It wasn't Shammah's victory. Shammah was God's tool that he used to bring this victory. And 3 of the 30 chief went down and came to David in the harvest time under the cave of Adullam. And the troop of the Philistines pitched in the valley of Rephaim. And David was then in an hold, and the garrison of the Philistines was then in Bethlehem. And David longed and said, "Oh, that one would give me a drink of the water of the well of Bethlehem, which is by the gate." And the 3 mighty men brake through the host of the Philistines and drew water out of the well of Bethlehem, and was by the gate, and took it and brought it to David. Nevertheless, he would not drink thereof, but poured it out unto the Lord. And he said, "Be it far from me, O Lord, that I should do this. Is not this the blood of the men that went in jeopardy of their lives? Therefore we would not drink it. These things did these 3 mighty men." And so you think about this story, right? David's here. He's in the cave. They're back down. They're probably just trying to figure out, what to do next. And David didn't even command these men to do it. David just made a statement saying, "Hey, I would love some water from Bethlehem." Now, this is where David grew up in. I don't know about you, but especially if you have some good water. I can still taste the water that we had at the church back in Texas when I was a little bitty kid. I mean, that water, it was some well water, and I'm talking like that water tasted amazing. I can still taste it. This is what David's thinking. David's thinking, I can still taste that water. Maybe while he was out, as the shepherd boy, he wanted to get some water out of that well from Bethlehem. And when you get in those places of loneliness and you get in places where you're not sure what to do, maybe just a little nostalgia from home might hit you a little bit, right? And you're just thinking, wow, you're reminded about it. You're thinking about it. And that's what David was. He was just probably thinking a little bit out loud. But see, these mighty men heard it. And the Bible talks about to whom much is given, much is required. And that was kind of the lesson Brother Simpson was talking about, these 3 mighty men. Again, who were the people that were with David? These were people who were in debt. They were people who were running from Saul because maybe Saul was trying to put him in prison. And David gave them a purpose. He forgave their debts. He didn't hold the debt over their head and say, "You're going to pay me." And what does God do for us when we come to him? He forgives us of our sins. He purges us from all unrighteousness. He gives us a new life, gives us a new purpose. And Saul, I'm just going to picture Saul as the devil here. I mean, I'm not saying he was or he is, but picture type, Saul's the devil, and David could be Christ. And that's what was going on. These men were coming to David for some refuge, and David offered it to them. And these men loved David to the point they were willing to risk their life just for the thought of David having some water from Bethlehem. And he didn't command them to do it. He didn't look at these 3 mighty men and say, "You go do this for me or else." He just made a statement, and these men remembered what David had given to them. And they loved David to the point they were willing to risk their life for a cup of water. And to some people, that might seem a little foolish, but that's the way we should be for God. God has given us so much, and just the idea of us being able to do something for God, even though it might risk our life, and let's not even say it risks our life, maybe it just risk us, looking stupid in a way. Just do it anyway. I'm talking to myself. I'm talking to myself so much today. Just do it anyway, though. Because if these men loved David to the point, they were willing to just go get him some water so that he could just quench a little bit of his thirst, remind him of home, of Bethlehem, then we should be like that with the Lord. But when it came back to David, David wouldn't even drink it. David, and I don't know about you, but maybe it'd be like, wait, I just risked my life to go get this water, and I bring it to David, and David dumps it out. But David dumped it out as an offering to the Lord. And that's he gave this water to the Lord. And I think in a way, probably humbled David. Maybe he didn't even realize that, wow, these men love me. These men were willing, and that's what he said, these men were willing to break through the host of the Philistines and draw water on the well of Bethlehem. And he said, "Be it far from me," verse 17, "O Lord, that I should do this. Is not this the blood of the men that went in jeopardy of their lives?" So he's saying, I am in leadership over these men. Their blood is on my hands. When I command them to go do something, it'd be like, when I've listened to some podcasts of generals, when they give a command for men to go do something, it's not those men's blood on their own hands. They have been ordered to do something, and now the responsibility for those men lie in the hand of that general who gave them the order to go do something. That weighs heavy. And that's what I think David kind of realized in a way that these men went in jeopardy for me. And their lives are my life in reality. And that's what David's saying here, and he gave it out to the Lord. But the lesson from these mighty men is just, if we love the Lord, if we love Him, we love His commandments to go into all the world and preach the gospel, then like these men, we should be willing to risk a little bit of pride, maybe a little bit, ultimately maybe even risk our life for the cause of Christ, like these men were willing to do. And then we got a whole lot of them. I'm going to try to get through it here. And Abishai, the brother of Joab, the sons of Zeruiah, the chief among the three, he lifted up his spear against 300 and slew them and had the name among them. Was he not the most honorable of the three? Therefore he was their captain, howbeit he attained not unto the first three. Then Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, the son of a valiant man of Kabzeel, who had done many acts, he slew 2 lion-like men of Moab. He went down also and slew a lion in the midst of a pit in time of snow. That's crazy. And he slew the Egyptian, a goodly man, and the Egyptian had a spear in his hand, but he went down to him with a staff and plucked the spear out of the Egyptian hand and slew him with his own spear. I mean, if you're a man reading this, it's amazing. I mean, these guys weren't messing around. These guys these guys, one of the things you read when you're reading this poor scripture is these guys didn't wait for the fight. These guys saw something that needed to be done, and they went and got it done. They weren't waiting around for David to give them a command. They already knew what David's will was. David's will was to defeat the enemy of God. And I listened to a message one time, and one of the reasons that David was a man after God's own heart was because David's enemies were God's enemies. And he made it, I guarantee you, every man that was under his authority knew who God's enemies were. And they knew that they were David's enemies, and they weren't waiting around for them to give them a reason to do something in reality. They were going and getting it done. And we don't need to wait. We know, sometimes we don't know the exact will of God for our life, but we know the general will of God for our life. And I think maybe sometimes, you're waiting for the exact before you do anything. We just need to go get it done. Just go get it done. These men weren't waiting around. They knew the general will of David was that the bad guys cease to exist. And God's will is for us to get the gospel to the world. And like these men, just don't wait around. Go get it done. And these things did Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, and had name among 3 mighty men. He was more honorable than the 30, but he attained not to the first 3. And David set him over his guard. And Ashel, the brother of Joab, was one of the 30. Elhanan, the son of Dodo of Bethlehem. And Shammah the Haradite, Elika, and these names are crazy. I'm not going to read those names. I'm not going to read the rest of these. Yeah, I'm not reading those. That's a lot. Yeah. But the thing is, nonetheless, they would have 600 men, right? But he had 37 men that were recorded. Not all 600 men were recorded. But all 600 men were important to David. I'm sure they were important to David. I mean, I think about, you have the story of Ziklag where the 200 couldn't even cross over. I think it was the Brook Besher, right? They couldn't cross over because they were tired and were doing. And so the other 400 went with David and they got the spoil and come back. And all these other men were like, well, they don't get nothing because they didn't come with us to fight. But David loved all the people. And if you remember that story correctly, David talked to those 400 men. He saluted the 200 that stood by the stuff. And the 400 men, he's like, I don't even know if the reason you did what you did was so you'd get my honor and my glory, you're not going to get it. Because you did it for vainglory. You did it for you getting something. These men couldn't go any further. They stuck by the stuff. So David, what I'm getting at is David loved all of his men. But these 37 men, they were written about because they went above and beyond. And you could say the call of duty. right? They went above and beyond what was asked of them to do. They went above and beyond, and they might have lived maybe, I don't know if I can say this, maybe more, I don't want to say more righteous lives, because I'm not going to say that the other men didn't do this. But these men wanted more, and they got more done. And they went all in, and they gave it all to God, and God used them. And there's stories written about them that you read, and you say, how is that even possible? Well, the answer is it's possible with God. It's possible with God. You think about the stories, and you almost think about it as almost unrealistic, but if you think about the stories of missionaries that have gone way before, that paved the path for what we have today. And you say, how did they get that done? They were just men, and they would tell you they're just men, but God gave them the ability to do it. God gave them the strength to overcome. You think about Brother Shoemaker. He's had malaria how many times? You think it's over 50 times, I think, maybe even 70 times. I mean, Isaac has had it, I think he said like 10 times. And you think, I mean, that's a dangerous disease. It's killed a lot of people. But he didn't get through those through those diseases and have the ability to build those churches on his own. He had that because he relied on the strength of the Lord. These men didn't have necessarily more talent than the rest of the people. But in reality, what they probably did was they just put it to work more than the rest of the people did. Not that the rest of the people weren't doing necessarily right. And, I mean, not everybody can be, I'm going to be in reality, not everybody can be one of the mighty men. But everybody can do their job. I'm sure that these mighty men couldn't have done what they did if there wasn't people staying behind that were guarding. They couldn't have went out if they had to worry about guarding their house. But, they had friends, they had family that were guarding, sticking by the stuff. That's what Brother Stallman's talked about in World War II. The reason we had such great victory was because when the soldiers went to war, they knew there were people behind them that were holding down the fort. And so that we got to have everybody. Not everybody can go. But when they do go, we support them. We don't give them any reason to be thinking about what's happening back behind them. So they just press toward the mark for the prize of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus. And so we want to be mighty men. We want to be valiant. We want to be warriors. But if we're going to do that, we have to be in the will of God. We have to be resting in the power of God, and we have to know for a fact that we are doing the will of God. Because if you have any doubt that you're doing the will of God, if you're in Africa, you're in trouble. If you have any doubt that you're doing the will of God, you're going to be in trouble, because if it's, oh man, I can't remember the exact quote, and I don't want it to sound like I'm quoting things. Brother Stallman put a quote on Facebook this morning talking about if it's your work, if it's your will, then when everything falls apart, you have nothing to stand on, because it's all you. But when it's God's will, when it's God's plan, and it falls apart, not that you blame God, but you don't blame Him, but you can understand that I wasn't doing this because I came up with this idea. I was doing this because God had a plan. And so when things fall apart, you just figure out, well, what was your plan for this? And so now I can learn from it and pivot and go on. These men probably had some failures before. I mean, you don't read about them, but they probably had failures, but they just didn't quit. They kept on going. And God allowed them to be written down. And some of these, I mean, he had 37 of them, and not all of them had stories to tell as far as that were written down. God picked a few of them that were written, but we just need to live in the power of God. And God will give us our own stories to tell about how God allowed you to, witness to somebody that you didn't think you could witness to. Maybe, that you could breakthroughs in people's lives that you didn't even seem possible. But it's because we're not doing the work. We're not doing the work. If it was up to us, we would fail. And we have failed. But when we rely on the Lord and it's up to Him, we can rest in that and just keep going on. And God gives the increase. It's for one to plant the seed, one waters the seed, but God's the one who gives the increase. We're not, Brother Chris talks about this all the time, we're not soul winners, we're just warning people. And when you take that pressure off, it's a lot better. I'm not trying to win somebody to Christ. I'm trying to warn them about the wrath to come. And then God is going to, if I plant that seed and I water it a little bit, then God is the one that gives the increase, not me. So we just got to rest in the Lord, rest in His power, rest in His will. I really had no idea what I was going to teach on today because, I mean, that story, those stories are kind of all over the place. But the thing is, you just got to rest in the Lord. Give Him your heart, give Him your life, and let God do something with it. And not worry about what you're going to do with it. Because God has a bigger plan for us than we have for ourselves. And we just got to live in His presence, live in His will, and allow Him to give the increase. Amen? We'll pray. Dear Father, thank you for this day, Lord. Thank you for the opportunity to be in your house again this morning. Lord, I just pray to help us as we go about the rest of the day. Give us a good time in the worship, singing, in the testifying, and the preaching time.